Thanks for joining me today. My name is Amanda, and this is DIY Design, where we learn to graphic design it yourself. Today, we're going to be looking at design faux pas and how to fix them. This is all of the stuff that you see amateurs doing and where you're seeing word art and all sorts of like HOA advertisements and mailbox posters, that kind of stuff. We want to make sure that we know what those are, we know how to fix them. And I'm going to go over in every example here, I'm going to go over why it's not a good idea to do it this way. So that way you've got an idea of, well, here's what you shouldn't do, but here's why you shouldn't do it. Because I feel like that's much more important for the learning process. Let's take a look at this. So Baker Street Wines is just a winery or a liquor store that I entirely made up. They don't exist, and or they might exist. I don't know. I made them up. If they do exist, I'm sorry, Baker Street Wines, but we're gonna make some designs for you. And what we're doing here is we're doing a flyer for a wine tasting that Baker Street Wines is putting on. This theoretical event, because again, I made all this up. This theoretical event includes different wine courses and different canapes to taste while you're drinking the wine. So this example that I have here is something that I see more often than anything else in amateur design and for folks who don't really know what they're doing. And this is text on top of a picture that we cannot read. Clearly with this example, it is incredibly difficult to read the text that is on there because the background is so busy and so vibrant. And we've changed the color of the text to try to make it stand out a little bit. But because we have so many darks and lights in this image, there's absolutely no way that we can really read this text in a quick and easy way. Like if you really try, you can get the gist of it. But assuming this was printed and it's the size of a postcard, this is going to be impossible to read. So one of the things that we want to never do is if you're going to put text over an image, and when I do the example at the end of the episode, I will put text over an image, but we'll see how to do it correctly. But when you're putting text over an image, the image can't have a ton of contrast. Contrast is fantastic in design, but you can't have contrast on contrast on contrast on contrast because you start to lose things. And that's exactly what's happening here. So our next example is one that I don't see quite as often these days, but it just rubs me the wrong way. And this is collages. A lot of people want image collages. Some cases it's because you have all sorts of great stock photography that you want to use, or you've taken pictures for your company. You have all of this great content that you just want to show everybody. The worst is when I see when you're doing like retreats or something and you have the group photo and you have teeny tiny little group photos where you can't tell who anybody is and you have them collaged out there and you can't read anything. The reason not to do this is it clutters your message. It just gives the viewer way too much information. It also falls into the trap that we were seeing in the previous example of having not enough contrast. You're blending contrast on contrast on contrast, which results in no contrast. So here we've got lots of great pictures. We have all the content we need. It's more readable than the last one. It's a plus. However, there's so much happening in here that as a viewer, I don't know what's going on. And I don't feel like this is an event that I'm willing to pay $50 for, because if they can't put this advertisement together, I don't feel like they can put this event together. This one, we're getting better, getting a little better. So we've got an image in the background that doesn't have as much contrast happening. It's not as busy. There's still some areas like in the at the end of the first sentence where it says socially distant wine tasting event is starting to get hard to read, and the lines below it are starting to get hard to read. But overall, it's not bad. We also have our logo in the lower right that is hard to read because it's over a contrasted area as well. So we're losing some stuff in the photo as we have been. In general, we have a grid system, we have hierarchy, so we're following a lot of rules here, but we're not getting contrast in the right way. So we're improving, but we're still hard to read here. Okay, Very easy to read. We've got lots of contrast. We have white and black. That's obviously high contrast. Our images aren't distracting. What's happening here that could be improved is the use of negative space is not being used appropriately. We have a very awkward rectangle for the woman who's drinking the glass of wine at the bar. It's a very awkward shape that's been put in there that fills some space, but doesn't fill it in a way that really seems to make any sense. There's a lot of negative space. Like in the upper right, we've got negative space that's just kind of there, and it's negative space that is awkwardly placed. It's almost taking, it's basically what it's doing is it's messing up your grid. We do have a grid here, but when you're not utilizing the negative space appropriately, you start to lose the grid and you lose the feel of the grid. So it looks unstructured and kind of slapped together. So again, we've got readability, and in all but the first example, we have readability, but we're missing some of the other principles of design. So in this one, we're totally mismanaging our negative space. And our last example here, this is my favorite. This is word art. And the thing with word art is it's almost hard to use it at this point. Microsoft Word and PowerPoint, they kind of hide it from you, which is great because you shouldn't ever use word art. Again, we have the contrast problem. The image behind has too much contrast, so our text is getting lost. We've got fonts and colors that are totally outside of what makes any sense. And we've got these headings that are in there. It's okay for a heading to be in a different font. It's usually a good thing if a heading is in a different font or a heading font. But word art always looks like it was cheap. It never looks like it was done professionally. It always looks like it was something that was just slapped together. There's never a time when word art is appropriate. And I may eat my words there someday in the future, but at this point in time, word art is never the answer. So let's take a look. We're actually going to design our own version of this. So I'm going to share my screen a little differently here so you can see as I'm designing. All right, so here's our PowerPoint. We're just going to add a new slide here. And for this example, I didn't set up any sort of specific size of the slide. It's just a generic PowerPoint slide. So we're going to start a new slide. It's going to give us the default text boxes. We're going to get rid of those. We never want those. Okay, so first things first, we've got most of our examples here show text over an image. So what I want to do is I want to do that, but I want to do it correctly. So I can show you how to do that. So we're going to go to Pixabay, which is the main stock image site that I like to use. And you can see I've just looked for wine. These are all free to use. They're royalty-free images. You can use them for advertising. And so in this case, that's what we're going to do. So what I'm looking for when I'm looking at stock images, I'm looking for stock images that have existing negative space in them, so that I can put text over them and create contrast. So for example, in this one here, we've got the grapes on one side and we have this space over here that's all relatively the same color, dark and blurry. So there's nothing behind there that's really going to be really distracting. I'm going to go ahead and open it in a new tab in case I want to go back to it. My only concern about it, and let me pull it up a little bigger. My only concern is that the negative space that we have to work with over here is not huge. It's the content is taking up just over half of this composition. And so I have less than half of the image to add my content. So this one is not ideal for that reason. So let's keep looking a little bit. We've got great negative space here in this one, but I don't really care about the bread and salami. I really just want wine. We've got some good negative space here. This isn't really what the vibe we're going for. It's not really appropriate for a wine tasting. It's just not ideal. This one may work. So we've got some different colors happening back here, but it's all kind of the same tone. It's not heavily contrasted. It's relatively simple. So let's open that one up in a new tab. We may go back to that one. This one has a lot of nice contrast. You could easily put white text on here and you've got lots of contrast happening. We'll go ahead and open that one up as well. We're avoiding things like this where there's too much going on in it, too much going on here in this one as well. This one has good contrast in the way that we would need it, but it doesn't have the space we need. It doesn't have the negative space. We're looking for an image with a lot of negative space that we can put our content into. Let's see. This one's pretty good, but we're not doing a full, and we have to be appropriate for the event. And in this case, we're doing just appetizers. We're not doing a full meal. So we probably don't want to put this one in there because that's a full meal. I recently had give you an example of this. I recently had an event that was serving beer and wine. It was not serving anything other than beer and wine. It was beer, wine, soda, and water, of course. But the advertisement had been printed saying it was a happy hour, and it showed a picture of a margarita. And that was a big problem because we were not serving margaritas at this event. And so I didn't design the advertising for this. I was hosting the event, not doing the design. But we had people get there. They kept asking the bartender for things that we didn't have because they were expecting it to be a full happy hour and full bar, because that's what the advertising it showed. So it's something that we want to be really aware of, so that we're not giving our customers a false sense of what they're receiving. We want to be very clear and make sure that we're the content that we're giving them is, or the content that they're seeing in the design is what they're getting. And doesn't, I mean, obviously these are stock images. These are not the wines specifically for Baker Street Wines, which again doesn't exist, but it's something that we want to keep in mind. This one, I actually want to look at this one. This one is a really good one. It is very vague in its color palette. It's all kind of one note. It's something that we could really put some text on that would pop. It may not be quite the right look we're going for, but let's go ahead and pull that one aside and see if we can work with that. This one does have some good space up here that we could use. It's definitely not a bad option, so I'll grab that too. There are going to be a ton of options in Pixabay. Wine is a pretty vague search term, so it just gave us a ton of options. Let's go through these real quick. This one I was not thrilled with because we didn't have the right layout. We don't have enough negative space, so I'm going to go ahead and rule that one out. This one I did really like. This one gives me the right feeling. It's very it's a very kind of millennial look, which wine tastings are something that a lot of millennials attend, so it's appropriate for my audience, especially if that's the audience I'm specifically going for. It doesn't have any food that would be out of the ordinary. It is outside versus inside, so that might be something to consider if your event is going to be inside versus outside. So this one's high on my list. This one's a little boring. I think it could be cool depending on where it was being used. This is something I would use in a magazine, for example, because you've got all this other stuff that's happening in a magazine. You may have other advertisements next to you and other things that are going on there. And this one is relatively simple. It has very high colors and very low colors, so bright whites and dark blacks. So adding contrasting text on here would help you stand out in a magazine. So this is good for some situations. I don't think it's right for this situation. This one I love. We may come back to this one. I don't think it's the best choice, but I think it could make a very cool design. So I'm going to leave this tab up. And then this one, it's a picture. nothing wrong with it. Nothing great about it. It's my one concern would be if Baker Street Wines is not serving whatever this wine is, we might want to do some photoshopping to get rid of that label, and that gets into more complicated stuff where you may need to hire a designer for. So I think our best bet is to use this one. This one, the photographer has made it so that we can't read the label. We don't know what wine this is. All we know is it's a red wine. It's probably a red, it's not a rosé, but we can't read anything. We can't tell anything. All we know is that there's wine going into a glass. It's outdoors. That's all the information we're being given, and that's vague enough for me. So I'm going to go ahead and download this. I don't usually download at the largest size. I download 1920 by 1080 or 1920 by 1280. It's somewhere in that size. This is a good size for most screen, most print. If you are doing a billboard, then you want the largest size, but in general, you don't need it. All right, so let's get this image. We've got it in my downloads folder. And let me pull PowerPoint back up. And so we've got our blank canvas. I'm just going to drag and drop this photo in. All right, I have my photo. And let's go ahead and get it set up. So one of the things that PowerPoint does that I actually kind of like is it gives you these examples or these design options. So if you drop a photo in there, it'll give you a bunch of options. We can see more design ideas. There's lots of various things that it can do. And some of these are great for our purposes. These are not really going to work, and we want to do something on our own. But there's some cool things that you can do with this. Just remember the standard fundamentals. Keep it simple. Make sure it's clean. In this case, I am going to use the design idea that just fills the page, because that's what I was going to do myself anyway. If I were going to do that myself, the way to do that would be, and remember, when you want to size an image in PowerPoint, you always grab the corners, not the sides, because this stretches and skews. We don't ever want to do that. I would drag it so that it fills the page, and then in the picture format and crop, we would scale that over, and then we would enlarge the image and then reposition based on where we want it. But that's basically the same thing that this option is doing. I just wanted to show you how to do that on your own. Oops. If you don't want to use the crop feature, but the crop feature is very handy to at least know how to use. Okay, so we've got our picture. I'm just going to go back to one of these other advertisements to grab my text. So we've got our heading and our content, and we're going to do a lot of changing with this. So we just need it in text boxes. So what I did there was just Control-C, Control-V, and then on a Mac, it's Option. Remember, if you're using Keynote, a lot of the same stuff can be done. It just is the options are in different places. I don't use a Mac anymore. I used to a long time ago, but I do a lot with Excel and various clients that I work with. So I use a PC these days. Obviously, a Mac is a great tool for design. I absolutely love Macs. There's nothing wrong with either machine. I am a fan of both. If you have a Mac and you're using Keynote, you have pretty much all of the same features. They're just, the buttons are going to be in different places. All right, so we've got all of our text in here, and let's make some modifications here. In terms of hierarchy and level of importance, our call to action is the largest thing, which is good. Our heading is, or our heading and our call to action are the two largest things. I don't love this font and the way we've got this laid out here. There are a couple places where things are a little hard to read. So I want to make some changes and adjustments that make it a little bit easier for us to read things. So we've just have our default Calibri Light. It's a font. There's nothing special about it. It's very readable. I do highly recommend if you're just doing Word documents with text. It is, I use it all the time. In this case, we want to go with something a little more interesting. One of my favorites is Avant-Garde. It's a font that you can get online. It doesn't usually come default. I think it does on Macs. But we're going to go Avant-Garde, and we're going to go bold. It's a little too big now because it's running over into here, and I don't want it to get lost over there. So let's drop it down to 60. That looks pretty good. Now, my one concern, I'm actually going to move it over a tiny bit, give this a little more space to breathe. One of the things that you'll notice here, if you're looking really closely, is the space between the edge of the W and the border here is about the same between the edge of the T and the wine bottle here. That's something that as you're designing and you've been doing it for a long time, you start to just see those things because this is centered within the context of its placement. So it's centered between this border, which is an actual border, and this implied border, which is the edge of the in focus content. So I centered it in between those two things. So I've got my heading. I think what I'm going to do just to make this a little more interesting is go uppercase. That does mean that I've run into my my content again, or the part of my picture. So I got to change my font size. Go down to 54, and that's still recenter a little bit. Okay. My one little problem here is that in this upper corner, I'm having a little bit of trouble reading the I. It's perfectly readable. However, it blends a little bit, and I do want it to stand out. So we're going to come back and address that in a little bit. Okay, so the rest of this, I don't necessarily want it to be in, I don't want it to be in Calibri as well. I'd like it to be in something else. Let's go with, let's see how Georgia looks. Don't love Georgia. Sometimes it takes some time to figure these things out and decide what you want. I'm always a fan of Garamond, but in this case, so I'm glad we're showing this example because Garamond is a beautiful font. I love it for large pieces of text. I use it in documents all the time. However, in this case, it does have really thick thicks and really thin thins. So you can see it kind of here where on the F, the stem here is real thick and readable, but the crossbars here on the F are really, really, really thin. So if you have this font on top of an image, even if it's an image that has good negative space for you to utilize, like this one does, it can still be hard to read. So Garamond's probably not our best option. I don't have Minion. Let's just go with a sans serif font, which means there's no little curly cues on the edge, like this little edge on the Y and little marks on the edge of the F, which is in Wine Tasting Night, which is a sans serif font. We don't have any of that. So let's just see what it looks like if we go with Avant-Garde. I don't love that either. All right, we're gonna go through the fonts. I highly encourage you to go through this. You'll find fonts that you really love and that you use all the time. And part of the process of design is seeing what works and what doesn't. Sometimes I don't get it right the first time and I have to go through and see what works better. In general, the fonts that I think work the best are the ones that are pretty standard and that most computers have. Avenir is a good font. I really like Avenir. Let's use Avenir. All right, so I'm going to set it to Avenir Pro because that's kind of the mid-range, the medium font. Obviously, this has totally messed up our layout. We're going to have to adjust that, but I still have this problem of there's certain areas of this that are a little bit hard to read. But let's get this at least sized appropriately so that everything's fitting on the page neatly. I'm actually going to, oops. So we've got one large text box here. I'm going to remove the call to action and insert a new text box for it so that I have more control over it. And we're still in Avenir Pro, but we want to be, let's go. And actually, I think what I want to do. No, that won't work. But again, we're trying and we're failing and we're fixing it. So what the reasons this won't work is because it starts to get hard to read out here. So I don't want to have this going over this edge here. So I have I can do two things. I think what we'll try is we'll make just the web address, because that's kind of the main point of our call to action. Let's make that bigger and that can go across the stem of the wine glass. And that way it kind of pulls your eye around the image. So we've got kind of a circular motion with your eye happening here, which is great. This information here, socially is spelled wrong. Let's always check our spelling. So I don't like that socially distant gets cut off. So I'm going to resize this text box so that that doesn't happen. That makes it just a little bit cleaner. So we've got all of our information. We still have this problem where some parts are difficult to read, and we're going to resolve that in just a minute. I think I'm going to make this bold just so it stands out a little bit more, because and I'm also going to change the order here and change the size of these a little bit. So now it helps add to my hierarchy. So you're obviously going to read Wine Tasting Night first. That's great. The next thing is probably Friday, June 12th. So now you know what it is and you know when it is and you know how to get it. Now you can go back and look at the details if I still have your attention. This part here, even though it is higher up in the hierarchy, it isn't higher up in the visual hierarchy. The visual hierarchy is Wine Tasting Night, Friday, June 12th. Tickets available at bakerstreetwines.com. In the visual hierarchy, that's what you're going to see first. So you don't necessarily need to move this content. You don't necessarily need to move these. Oh my gosh. You don't need to move the paragraphs lower to make them lower on the hierarchy. You just need to make them visually less important. A couple of things I want to do here now. We do need to fix the readability. But I feel like there's a lot of space between here. That's called the kerning between the different lines. And I'd like to change that so we don't have quite as much space. In PowerPoint, the way to do that is right up here. Right now it's at 1 point spacing. We're going to go to line spacing options. And we're going to use exactly. So I can set it oops, I'm going up. I want to go down. I can set it myself. So now you see those got a little closer together. I want to go much further than that in terms of bringing these together. So I'm going to select it again. And again, we're right here, line spacing options. And we probably want to be around 45, is my guess. Oh, that's too close. Now, unfortunately, one of the things about PowerPoint that design software like Illustrator does have is they have preview functions, and sometimes in certain tools, PowerPoint doesn't have that. It's just, it isn't design software. It can just be used as design software. So it's pretty close. Let me modify it a little bit more. We're going to go down to 56. That looks pretty good. All right, so that brings those two together a little bit. Okay, now let's address this issue of readability. We've definitely got some readability here, and you can actually see in what we currently have how similar it is in terms of readability to this. There are several things that we can do. So let's take a look at some of them. For the text here, let's try adding some effects to it and see if we could get it to pop off the canvas a little more. So I'm going to shape format. Now here's our word art. We're not going to use that because we don't like word art, but we have outlines and effects. So adding a shadow to it, and this does have a preview, which is really nice. You can kind of see what's happening. Adding a shadow to the outside, an outer shadow, can help it pop off the page a little bit more. So you can see it's a little bit better. Still not thrilled with this. One of the things I would try here is to make it a higher contrast in color, and that actually works pretty well. The problem is that this solution won't work here, because let's take a look at it. If I make this text white, gets better up here, gets worse down here. So that doesn't really fix our problem in this text. So let's try a different solution for that one. I think in this case, what I'd like to do is we're gonna add something to the background to make it have less contrast. So let's insert a rectangle. We're going to put it over here on the side. Now, this is obviously not the best color for this. I want to use one of these darker colors that's already in my background. So shape fill, eyedropper. I'm going to grab, that's a good color because this green now goes with everything else that's in here. And now what I want to do is I want this green to disappear as it goes further to the right. It does also still have its default outline on it, so we want to take that off. But I'd like it to gradient over. So let's see if we can get that to work. So in our shape fill, we want to do gradient. We're going to go more gradients because we want some control over it. We're going to gradient fill, and it's going to get rid of our pretty green, unfortunately. So we're gonna have to re-grab that one. In this gradient, it's got a lot of extra colors happening. I really just want, we're gonna change the angle to 180. So now we've got it going the direction we want. I really want it to just go, let's change it to 0 because that makes more sense in terms of the slider. So this one, I'm gonna change the color, and I'm actually gonna move it over so I can grab that green again. Eyedropper. Let's go grab that nice olive green. And then over here, I actually want the same color, which is going to be available right there, but I want the transparency to be 100%. So now if we pull this over here, you see how it disappears into the background. So I'm going to make this a little bit bigger, and then I'm going to select the gradient, and I'm going to hit Shift, and then I'm going to select the image, right click, send to back. That pops it behind our text here. And now we've actually got a pretty dark box over here. It might work now if we make this stuff white. Actually, that does work pretty well. I do have a little bit of problem here. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my gradient, and I'm going to pull this slider over so that the green comes further out. And that just makes it so that when the 100% transparency, when it's 100% transparent on the far right side, it doesn't start moving to that until about halfway across. So you can see that as I move this over, the dark spot, the darkness moves with it. So that way I can push the darkness over a little bit. That sounds really weird. Push the darkness. All right, but point being, we've now got something very readable. Our last concern is down here, because over the dark part, the bakerstreetwines.com is very readable, but over the lighter part, or I'm sorry, it's not as readable, but over the lighter part it is. Right now, it's readable enough. It's not something that I would be mad about. I would use this. It's okay. However, let's try a couple additional options. First thing I'm going to try is changing the font color to something in the image. And so I've got here, this actually makes it blend in more. However, it blends in relatively equally to the lights and the darks. So let's try adding shadow to this. So again, shape format, text effects, shadow. Now, if I add shadow to this, and I want to add the same kind of shadow that I added earlier, which I think was there. If I add shadow to this, that actually pops it off a little bit better. It also makes it stand out in general because it's not, because it is a different color than the other text. I think the pink is not quite the right color. So let's try again for another color. Maybe we can try this deep red. That's definitely too dark. So let's stay in the lighter range. We can go kind of more of an off-white. Now that's looking a little too white. I think we do want to be in the pink, just not quite as dark. Okay, that's looking pretty good. I still feel like we're a little bit hard to read over there. So I think what I'm going to do, this color is also not looking very winey to me. That's too dark. Okay, this is a very mid-tone. It's still doesn't look especially winey, but it's a nice color. I'm actually going to shrink Baker Street Wines a little bit so that we've got bakerstreetwines.com so that it's in the same space here. So I'm going to shrink both of them so I've got a little more visual hierarchy. And now I need to, because I've shrunk them, I need to change my spacing options. So right at 56, let's go down to 40. Yep, that's about right. Now it's a little close. Let's go up to 45. Okay, that's better. I still don't love this color, but now I've got it off of the lightest part of the background. So let me go with a lighter color back to one of these. And if you have, you've got all of your previous colors here. So if I go back to this color, which I think was the best of the colors that I'd picked, stick with that color. There it is. All right, so I think we are good here. This is what I would go ahead and put out. And here's what's working for this. We've got high contrast between the foreground and the background. So our content has got high contrast. We've worked with our image and worked with our existing negative space to bring in more of the background color and to tone it down so that there isn't quite as much contrast happening in that background. We have created a visual hierarchy for what's most important, the wine tasting night, what it is, when it is, and how to get what you want to get. Actually, as I'm going through here, I just want to make one more change. There we go. And our most important call to action, the bakerstreetwines.com, is in a different color so that it kind of pulls it away from the other text and makes it stand out visually. We grabbed this color from the wine itself, so it very closely matches the wine here. So just like the green that we grabbed from the background, it all coordinates. And we've checked our spelling. We've laid it out in such a way that we don't have awkward negative space. One of the things that we did here is we've got negative space in here. However, the negative space is right where the curve of this glass happens, so that we're not filling that space, but we're implying filling that space, which sounds a little weird, but we're working with the lines that are already in our image to lay out our text so that it flows neatly. And so with that, I think we are done. I hope you learned something useful today. To be notified when new episodes come out, join our mailing list using the link below. For more content and upcoming classes, visit us online at amandalubo.com and go unleash your inner designer. We'll see you next time.